Okay, welcome to Body Moves. This lesson is titled Knowledgeable Feet, Knowledgeable Knees and Flexible Feet. Like I mentioned, it can be done lying down. That's how the lesson was originally written. Can easily be modified in the sitting position in a sturdy armless chair. Your shoes will need to be off, and the sole of your feet will need to glide across the floor. So if socks on a smooth floor work well, or putting your foot in a plastic shopping bag works well too. So I'm Dotti Harness-Foster, a Feldenkrais practitioner. And this lesson will help you identify how your foot rolls across the floor, which leads up through your ankle, your knee, your hip. And you're going to find that the top of your head is moving by the end of this lesson. If you have had any issues with shin splints, ankle sprains, or bunions, or plantar fasciitis, this lesson is awesome. So let's see. I'd like to introduce to you Skinny Rick. Let's move to that. Before I do that, let's talk a little bit about technology. All of you are muted. My husband is here to monitor the chat. If it's intermittent bandwidth, you can cut my video, you can cut your video, and it opens up more bandwidth on your end. And any questions that you have, put in the chat and he'll monitor. The chat button is in the center lower of your screen. And I want to bring in Skinny Rick. So, like I mentioned, this lesson can be done in sit or standing. It's easier for me to show you this with Skinny Rick sitting. I intentionally put his arms above his head just to get them out of the way for the demonstration here. So if you're doing this lesson in sit, you start out like this, and one of the first movements is tilting the leg out and in. And if you put your hand on the outside of your hip, you feel this femur, greater trochanter coming up, and that's what you feel is that big bone right out there on the outside of our hip. But what's truly interesting is as this bone goes into the ball and socket of your hips. So we're warming up that joint real easily and gently. And then the lesson progresses to sliding your foot out and then bringing the heel back closer to your pelvis or the base of the chair. So you're sliding in and out, and this is where the plastic bag comes in handy. You can put your foot in a bag, and then it slides real easily. So I'll put that aside. Okay, bones of the foot are fascinating. We have 26 bones in our foot. And so when you slide your foot forward on the floor, it's opening up these bones, especially across the top, because one of the prompts that I'll be including is that you keep your toes in contact with the floor. And so that means everything has to move to accommodate that movement. And then the lesson says, okay, let's just start out with this tapping movement. just like you would be tapping to a song or something. But what's interesting is how this mobilizes the ankle and the two bones in our shin all the way up into your knee. And then the lesson says, oh, tap your little toe off to the side, then tap your big toe. And what that does, if the camera can zoom into your foot, in order to tap, you're really encouraging all these 100 muscles in our foot to activate and to mobilize as your foot does different movements, okay? And by the end of the lesson, we're really testing the stability by pressing the base of your big toe, the base of the little toe, and the front of your heel. And let me show you, I got a chopstick with me here, and I'm putting it right down the middle of the tibia and fibula, and it comes down at the front of the heel there. And that's key for stability. So this lesson, I'll be prompting you to make a nice tripod in the sole of our foot so that we have a really sturdy surface to lie on. So now I'm going to show what this lesson looks like in lying and why it is so easily modified. Okay, so basically, this is the seated position, just lying on the back. So the feedback from the floor is going to be different, of course, if you're lying on the floor versus seated in your seat. I'll try to prompt you through both of those. So lying on the floor, you're just going to put your legs hip distance apart, your feet are flat on the floor, and from there it's very, very similar movements. One other thing is the lesson says, take one leg down, long, okay? What that does, and the skeleton doesn't show this very well, but it anchors the pelvis to this side on a diagonal. And we can do this in sit or lying on the floor. So you'll hear me talk about that throughout this lesson. So I think we're done with Skinny Rick. I'm going to put him off to the side. We are going to start this lesson noticing how we stand. If standing is not an option for you, you can do the same in sit, okay? So starting out in our standing position, cameras needs to be adjusted. So your feet are hip distance apart. You stand there and just notice where you are looking. What is your horizon at the beginning of this lesson? Notice what foot feels more weighted, more solid into the floor. And take your awareness to the sole of your right foot. Notice if there's more weight on the outside edge of your right foot, maybe the inside towards your big toe. And do the same on the left side, the sole of the left foot. What toe feels more grounded? What part of your foot feels more grounded. The front of the heel, the back of the heel. And now tilt, and now bring the weight into the ball of your feet. So your pelvis wants to come forward, the heels stay on the ground. So it's a very small, transferring your weight forward into the ball of the feet. Notice how your pelvis comes forward and your head wants to go back. Internally, we want to balance. And then take the weight back into your heels and notice how your pelvis wants to go back and your head wants to come a bit forward. And go back and forth, tilting your weight forward into the ball of your feet and back into your heels. And notice the movement in your pelvis, in your head. And then walk around a bit. I know we don't have much room in our homes, but walk around. If you're doing this and sit, you can walk your pelvis in your seat. Notice how the sole of your foot rolls across the floor. What toes are the last to leave the floor? What is the bend like in your ankle? When does your knees come forward as you propel yourself forward? And then put your hands on your hips. Get a sense of the swagger in your pelvis. You can put your hands here on your ribs. Notice the involvement in your ribs. And where do you look? And then come to your starting position, whether you're seated or lying on the floor. And I'm going to demonstrate our first move in the sit position. Our feet are hip distance apart. My knees are forward. In the sitting position, forward is going to be straight forward. If you're lying down, forward is going to be toward the ceiling. So it's relative to the position that you choose. And we're going to just start out by tilting our knee in and out. So come to your starting position and let's begin tilting your, it doesn't matter which leg. We're going to do both. So tilt the one that just wants to start out. What is the most available, whatever you decide on the first leg. We're going to do both. And you can put your hand around the outside of your hip and you feel your femur coming in to that ball and socket. Notice how you're rolling over to the outside edge of your foot. And as your knee comes inward, the inside edge of your foot is in contact with the floor. And let's switch legs, doing the other side, rolling over the sole of your foot. And at this point, we're keeping the pelvis pretty quiet. Those of you who are sitting, you're going to sense some of these movements into your sits bones, the two bones at the base of your pelvis. For those of you lying on the floor, it's your backside. And let's just shake it out. Wiggle around a bit. So now we're going to do the very similar movement, but we're going to activate our pelvis. So as your leg goes out to the right, allow the pelvis to also, and I'm exaggerating, tilt to the right. As your leg comes back in, the pelvis comes more through the center. So now it's your turn, tilting your pelvis, your knee out and in. and exaggerate the movement of the pelvis, which may bring along your torso, your ribs, your head may want to look and track the tilting leg. Allow that to happen. Those of you lying on your back, you may feel the weight going into the same side of your pelvis as the way the knee wants to tilt outward. And let's switch legs, tilting the other knee in and out. And allow the pelvis to participate. So as your knee travels out, there's more weight to the outside edge of that same leg. Allow your head, your nose, everything to participate. And then go back and forth, tilt one leg, tilt the other leg. Get a sense of how your body can participate and to track the movement of the knee. And then shake it out. So our next movement is going to be very similar, but one leg is long. So if you're in the seated position, the long leg is just off to the side. My heel is in contact with the floor, but that is just weighting down. There's no support from that foot. If you're lying on the floor, you have one leg long and the other leg is standing. Knee is directed forward. And let's tilt your standing leg in and out. In and out. Rolling across the sole of your foot. And now let's exaggerate this movement by allowing the participation of the head. And you can exaggerate it further by when your knee is tilted outward, the inside edge of your foot comes up. When your knee tilts inward, the outside edge of your foot comes up. So it's involving the sole of your foot, which you may need to take it easy because of the muscles in your foot. If they want to cramp up, you just back it off, make it smaller, take it slower. You can always switch sides. And speaking of that, let's switch sides. So that standing leg goes long and the other leg comes up to stand, and tilt it in and out. And allow your pelvis, your body, your head to track the movement of the tilting leg. And let's exaggerate it from the sole of the foot. So as you tilt out, bring the inside edge of your foot up. As you tilt inward, the outside edge comes up. So be easy on yourself. You may get a sense that as you tilt your knee outward and the inside edge comes up, the big toe wants to sort of curl under closer to the pad of the big toe. Allow that to happen. We have 100 muscles in the sole of our foot, so no surprise. And let's shake it out. Okay, let's come to that slide that shows all of the different angles of the foot. Okay, so my husband's bringing up to the screen a slide that shows so many different positions and movements of the ankle. 3 different drawings there. And we're going to be exploring all of this. So our next step involves the middle, let me think, the one off to the side where we're hinging our foot. So bring it back to me, I think, babe. I'm going to turn sideways so you can see my foot. We're going to be in the standing where our feet are standing or our knees are hip distance apart and forward. And we're going to start out by just tapping our foot. Doesn't matter which foot, we're going to do both. So you pick one foot. And I'm just bringing my toes closer to the shin, like that. So come into your position, sitting or lying, your feet and hips and knees a comfortable distance apart, and bring the foot of your choice, bring the toes closer to the shin, and then set your foot back down. And continue doing that movement. And notice how when your forefoot comes closer to your shin, you tend to want to round your back. The pelvis tilts back. Allow that to happen. When your foot taps down onto the floor, the pelvis tilts forward. So toes closer to the shin, take it slow enough so that you can round yourself back, your back coming closer to the chair, the foot taps down, tilt your pelvis forward, the belly button coming forward. So if you're musically inclined and you're tapping, you are tapping to the slowest song you can possibly imagine. So as your toes come closer to the shin, you're rounding, looking down in the direction of your knees. As your foot taps back onto the floor, you're rounding, tilting, arching forward a bit. It tends to want to open up your throat. So take it slow enough so that you can actually feel your back press into the floor or rounding back when the forefoot is up, and that you can arch forward when you set your foot down. And let's switch sides. So the other forefoot comes closer to your shin, rounding back, and the foot comes back down to the floor. You're arching forward, looking up the horizon, and the toes come closer to the shin, rounding yourself back, looking down towards your lap, tap, and coming forward. Do that several times, this gentle tapping movement. And now bring both feet together. So both toes come closer to their shin and both feet set down together. And really bring in the movement of the pelvis, the spine, looking down towards your knees when the toes are up, coming through, arching, leaning forward, looking up the horizon a little bit as you tap down. So you do this at your own speed, tapping, making sure that you're breathing, inhaling as you tap your feet down, exhaling as you round yourself back. And when you feel that you are done with that, let's take a break and shake it out and wiggle it out. So while you rest a moment, I'm going to share a visualization with you that helps me with this next movement. So think of a rubber raft in rough seas. That raft is constantly molding and evolving over the waves. And this next few steps, our feet are going to be doing the same thing. So come to your starting position, seated or lying on the floor. Both feet are standing for right now, if that's comfortable for you. Pick whatever foot you want to. We're going to do both. And lift your forefoot and set the big toe to the inside and then the little toe to the outside. Zoom into my foot, Rick. So the big toe comes to the inside and the little toe to the outside. So you get a sense that your foot is making an arc. Big toe reaches down toward the inside. Little toe reaches down to the outside. The heel stays in contact with the floor. If you're seated, you can wrap your hands around that same knee and you feel how this movement ripples up through the tibia and fibula into your knee. And now, when you pick up your foot, cross the little toe to the inside, lift up your foot, cross the big toe to the outside. So it almost feels like a crisscross in your foot. And maybe the scenario of your foot being a rubber raft helps, maybe not. It does for me. And by all means, if you get a cramp in your foot, you shake it out, you can switch legs. In fact, let's switch legs. Okay. So your other foot flat on the floor. Take the pad, not the pad, the base of the big toe to the inside and the base of the little toe to the outside. So you get a sense that you're making an arc. Your knee is softly directed toward the ceiling. It wants to move a bit and allow that to happen, but it's not a big tilting movement. By keeping your knee softly directed to the ceiling, you encourage this movement to happen down in the ankle, mobilizing all those 26 bones in your foot. And now cross the little toe to touch down on the inside and the big toe to the outside. So now it's this crisscross movement. Very different. And feel free to put your hands around your knee. To me, it's fascinating all how this movement ripples up into your knee. You may even be feeling it up into the hip. And then bring that foot back to a stable standing on the floor, keeping your knee softly directed to the ceiling. Roll your foot in and out. So now by keeping the knee still, we're not tilting it, it says, okay, ankle, you need to activate muscles in the shin in order to tilt your knee out, tilt your foot to the outside edge, rolling across the sole of the foot to come to the inside edge. It's a small movement, but I don't know about you, the muscles in the base of my foot are really talking to me right now. I got to shake it out on that side. So now I'm going to keep the other knee directed toward the ceiling or forward if you're sitting. And this movement is all going to happen down in my foot, rolling across the sole to the outside edge between the little toe and the outside of the heel, rolling across the sole of the foot to the big toe and inside edge of the heel. Even thinking about it, there's muscles in my foot that are really talking to me right now. So I'm going to back off from the movement a little bit and shake my feet out. Oh. Oh, yeah. So when you're done with that, shake out your feet. And I'm going to share with you a quote from the book that you've heard me mention several times. I'm going to share a little quote that has to do with the small movements in this lesson of our feet. Even the smallest movement in one part of the body involves the entire body. In a person who is capable of effective, graceful, efficient movement, the entire body organizes as a whole to do that movement. So how I relate that to this, here we are talking about rolling across the sole of our foot, our little toe, our big toe, and how that ripples through our whole body, what most people would consider a very small movement in our foot, rippling all the way up. So, okay, on to the next step. Come back to your starting position, and your feet are flat on the floor, your knees are bent. Picking one foot, you're going to lift, keeping the heel in place, bringing the forefoot, let's just tap our foot a few times like we did before. And allow your pelvis to participate like it did before. So as your forefoot comes closer to your shin, you're rounding back and looking down at your lap. As your foot comes forward, you're tilting forward. And now begin moving your toes in a circle. And make this circle very small. The heel stays in contact with the floor. It is just one foot that's active right now. But allow this movement to go up through your pelvis and into your ribs. So your knee is softly directed toward the ceiling or forward position. But notice as your toes go inward, the weight is more centered. As your toes go towards your shin, it presses your backside back and rounding. As the toes go outward, there's more weight on that side of your pelvis. And when your toes come closer to the mat, you tend to want to arch yourself forward. So it's tempting to circle your foot quickly, but I can't stress enough to make this circle small enough so that your pelvis, your torso, your head has the opportunity to track the movement of your foot and change the direction of your foot. So as the toe goes outward, there's more weight behind that side of the pelvis. As your toes come closer to your shin, you can round yourself back. As the toe comes closer to the floor, you can arch yourself forward. And you could even let your pelvis take over the drive, the be in the driver's seat of this circle, switching directions. And let's switch sides. Shake it out. Take a little break. It's a lot to think about. Okay, changing our focus to the other foot. It's flat on the floor. The heel stays in contact with the floor. Start out by lifting your toes closer to the shin, rounding your pelvis back, looking in the direction of your knees, and then setting that foot down and arching yourself forward, looking up the horizon. Do this several times, taking it slow enough that you can feel and track the movement of your soul, and you can exaggerate the movement a bit with your whole torso. And after you've done that and feel confident with that, let's begin to circle your foot. So as the foot goes to the outside, there's more weight to the outside edge of the pelvis, the foot up, pelvis tilts back, toe in. You may feel weight even going into the other side of the pelvis. And as the foot comes down closer to the floor, your pelvis tilts forward. So at your own pace, take a slow circle with your forefoot. Switch directions. And you're softly keeping the knee directed forward. And allow your head to also make a circle. So as your foot comes closer to your shin, you're looking down at your knee, then the head goes off to the side, opens up, comes to the inside. In fact, you can let your head take charge of the movement. Take the tension out of the rest of the part of your body. So make sure that the leg that's not circling, that the toes aren't crunched up and working. There's no tension in your hands. You're breathing softly. And when you're done with that, let's shake it out and take a moment. A lot of things to think about. So one of our last steps is going to be sort of going back to where we started the movement. We're going to slide one foot forward and back. And then we're going to do the other foot forward and back. And then we're going to do both, which really brings in our pelvis. And tilting our knees. Okay, so it's your turn. Come back to your starting position. Your feet are flat on the floor, knees hip distance apart. Pick one leg and slide it forward and back. And if you're on a carpeted surface, you may need a plastic bag, because you want to be able to slide your foot forward and back. The entire sole of your foot stays in contact with the floor. And let's switch sides. I'm going to put that off to the side so you can see my feet more clearly. The toes go forward. The whole sole of the foot stays in contact. And the heel comes back closer to your pelvis. If you're sitting, the heel comes back closer to your chair. You may feel this in the calf muscle, in the ankle. And now we're going to do both feet. So as both feet go forward, you're rounding yourself back. As the heels come closer to your chair, allow it to tilt yourself forward and arching your back. So accentuate this movement where you're rounding back, looking down in the direction of your knee. The heels come in towards your chair, your pelvis, rounding yourself. Accentuate this movement. And come back to that neutral starting position. Tilt one knee, doesn't matter which one. Rolling from the inside edge to the outside edge. This time, let the knee activate the movement of the sole of the foot. So now we can tilt our knee and begin making this back and forth tilting movement smaller and smaller till you come to a spot where the sole of your foot feels flat on the floor. When you're there, press the base of the big toe into the floor, the base of the little toe, and the front of the heel so that you make a nice tripod. Press your foot into the floor and notice how it sends your pelvis back on a diagonal a bit. And when you unpress, you come back to sit. Just do that a few times. You get a sense of the stability that you get from that solid tripod at the base of your foot. And then come back to your neutral position, tilting the other knee in and out like we did. So you're rolling from the inside to the outside edge of the foot. The knee is in charge. Your head can be involved, which brings in your ribs, your torso. And make this movement smaller and smaller until your foot feels flat on the floor. When you get there, press the base of your big toe, the base of your little toe, and the front of your heel. And press that foot into the floor. Notice how it sends your pelvis back on a diagonal a bit. And when you unpress, you come back up to your starting position. Just test out. You're just testing the stability that you have in the sole of your foot when we make a nice tripod. And this is towards the end of the lesson. So any other little movements that you feel you want to make, to explore. And when you feel like you've done enough exploring, we're going to come back to your starting point, whether that was in sit or standing. I'm going to get the chair out of my way. I started out in standing. So in a standing or sitting position, whatever you choose, come to where your feet are flat on the floor. And notice how the sole of your feet contact the floor, taking your awareness to the right side of your right foot. Press the ball of your big toe, the little toe, the front of the heel, and then take your awareness to the other foot, pressing the big toe, outside of the little toe, the front of the heel. And with two tripods pressing into the floor, get a sense of how that ripples through your knee, your pelvis, your spine. Where do you look? Do you feel that you have a dynamic stance? And begin to walk around a bit, noticing how the sole of your foot rolls across the floor now. Walk forward, walk back. Put your hands on your hip, get a sense of the swagger that you may have in your pelvis. Put your hands around the outside of your ribs. If you imagine that you're walking into a room with a bunch of guests that are expecting you, and you walk in with a dynamic, vibrant pace where you're looking out into the crowd. You feel in charge. You feel like this pace is effortless but dynamic. If I were to invite you for a walk on the beach, and that beach has pebbles and boulders that we need to step over that could be a little bit wet and mossy, would you join me? Would you join me for a walk on a trail that has lots of roots and it just rained, so everything's a little slippery? Do you feel a little bit more stable now? Well, that's the end of this lesson, knowledgeable knees and flexible feet. Next week, we are going to do bending and standing steady. Again, it can be done in standing, is the preference, modified to sit. We meet each Wednesday and Saturday, 9:30 Alaska time. And this has been brought to you absolutely free. Huge thank you to the Northwest chapter of the American Parkinson's Disease Association and the Homer Council on the Arts. So if you feel this has been helpful, be heartful and consider a donation to either one of those organizations.